They ruled America's highways like rolling skyscrapers, loud, square, and unstoppable. For nearly half a century, Cabover trucks were everywhere, until they vanished almost overnight. What brought down one of the most iconic shapes in American trucking? Today, we're unearthing the hidden story of how laws, comfort, and economics erased an engineering legend, and whether its ghost might be returning. The origin story, 1930s to 1940s. They didn't start as icons, they started as a workaround. In the late 1930s, America's highways were still young, narrow, and brutally regulated. Most states had strict length limits on trucks. Some capped the total vehicle length at just 45 feet. Every inch of hood meant an inch less trailer space. And in freight, fewer feet meant fewer dollars. That's where Leland James comes in. A man who didn't just see numbers, he saw opportunity. At the time, he was the head of Consolidated Freightways, a growing trucking company desperate to haul more cargo without breaking the law. Watching his drivers wrestle long-nosed trucks through crowded city streets, James had an idea that sounded borderline absurd. What if we moved the cab on top of the engine instead of behind it? It wasn't entirely new. European truck makers had been experimenting with cab-over engine designs, but no one in America had truly committed. James was about to change that. In 1939, he founded a new company called Freightliner Corporation with one goal: build trucks that could carry more freight in less space. The first prototype was built in 1940 inside a converted blacksmith shop in Salt Lake City. They nicknamed it Old Grandad. It looked strange. All riveted aluminum with a squared off face that made it look more like a rolling toaster than a truck. Drivers joked it was a bread box on wheels, but jokes didn't matter because the design worked. Old Grandad could pull a 35-foot trailer and still stay within legal limits. Conventional trucks, by comparison, were stuck with 28-foot trailers. That extra 7 feet meant 25% more freight per trip, a game changer for trucking economics. The design had other unexpected benefits too. The shorter wheelbase made it incredibly nimble in city streets. Its aluminum body was lighter than steel, meaning more payload and less fuel burned. And with the driver sitting higher up, visibility improved so much that early reports even suggested fewer city accidents. By 1942, Freightliner was building cabovers for other companies, not just its own fleet. A brand new model cost around $6,000, roughly $110,000 today, which was competitive with standard trucks, especially given how much more they could haul. But just as Freightliner's invention was starting to catch fire, World War II froze civilian truck production. The company switched to building aircraft components, and cabover development went on pause. When the war ended in 1945, America was ready to move again. Highways expanded, factories ramped up, and a baby boom turned into a buying boom. By 1947, Freightliner was back in business. And this time, it wasn't just solving a legal problem. It was about to help redefine American trucking. The golden era, 1950s to 1970s. When the war ended, America exploded with motion. Factories roared back to life, suburbs stretched into open land, and a new interstate system began to lace the country together like veins of concrete. Everything needed to be moved. Lumber, appliances, food, steel, and the trucking industry became the new bloodstream of the American economy. And in this booming landscape, cabovers were perfect. By the early 1950s, Freightliner wasn't alone anymore. Kenworth, Peterbilt, International, Mack, and White Motor Company all jumped into the cabover game. What started as a clever workaround for legal restrictions had evolved into a new standard for heavy hauling. These weren't just boxes on wheels anymore. They were becoming machines of pride and progress. The numbers tell the story. In 1955, cabovers made up just 8% of all heavy-duty truck sales. By 1965, that number hit 20%, and by 1975, nearly 30% of every Class 8 truck sold in America had its cab perched above the engine. At their peak in 1979, manufacturers sold over 35,000 cabovers in a single year. But beyond the sales, what made these trucks special was how they represented American ingenuity in motion. Take the Kenworth K100, introduced in 1961, sleek, aerodynamic by the standards of the day, and shockingly luxurious. Drivers could order air conditioning, AM/FM radios, and sleeper compartments that rivaled motel rooms. It wasn't just a truck, it was a home on wheels for the men who spent their lives behind the wheel. Meanwhile, Peterbilt's 352 and later the 362 became status symbols in trucking yards. Their polished aluminum faces and bold vertical grills looked futuristic compared to the long-nosed conventionals. Freightliner's FLC and International's Transtar 2 pushed the limits of efficiency and comfort. Cabover drivers sat high above traffic, commanding the road like captains on a ship's bridge. Kids on highways would wave up at them in awe, and the drivers would respond with that famous honk, a sound that defined an era. They even became pop culture icons. You could see them in movies, on TV, in toy stores. The Cabover wasn't just a machine. It was a symbol of the American worker, the open road, and the restless pursuit of progress. And the money followed. By the late 1970s, the Cabover market was worth over $2.5 billion annually, around $10 billion today. Companies like Kenworth and Freightliner were hiring thousands to meet demand. Kenworth's Chillicothe, Ohio plant employed 2,000 workers solely for Cabover production. Freightliner's Portland factory had over 3,000. For a while, the future seemed unstoppable. Cabovers were efficient, admired, and evolving fast. Car magazines raved about their design. Trucking magazines called them the growth engine of American freight. But just as they reached their peak, the first cracks began to show. Drivers started whispering about comfort, or rather, the lack of it. Sitting directly on top of the engine meant heat, vibration, and noise. The compact cab that made the trucks efficient also made them claustrophobic on long hauls. And beneath the shine and chrome, a storm was forming. A mix of laws, economics, and human fatigue that would soon turn admiration into abandonment. Peak and market dominance. Late 1970s. By the late 1970s, the Cabover wasn't just a type of truck, it was the face of American trucking. Every highway rest stop, every way station, every convoy had one sitting proudly among the diesel haze, its driver perched high above the hoodless expanse of steel. Cabovers had reached what could only be described as their golden peak. Industry analysts called them the growth engine of American freight. The Kenworth K100 was crowned Truck of the Year by multiple trade magazines. The Freightliner FLC dominated sales charts, while the Peterbilt 362 was so perfectly proportioned it ended up preserved in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History as an example of industrial design done right. By 1979, Cabovers accounted for over 35,000 new sales in a single year, a staggering number considering the size of the market. The entire Cabover segment was worth $2.5 billion annually, roughly $10 billion today. Manufacturers were thriving. Kenworth held roughly 28% of the Cabover market, Freightliner 24%, Peterbilt 18%, International 15%, and Mack 10%. Smaller builders like Diamond Rio and White Motor Company made up the rest. At Freightliner's Portland plant, 3,000 workers built trucks around the clock. The pride in those factories was unmatched. Many employees spent their entire careers building nothing but Cabovers. And despite the myths, truckers didn't hate them. Not all of them anyway. In fact, surveys from the late 1970s showed that 85% of Cabover owners planned to buy another one as their next truck. Drivers loved the commanding view, the agility, and the sense of owning the road. Cabovers also made economic sense. They could haul more freight per trip, were lighter thanks to aluminum construction, and surprisingly, often got better fuel economy, around 5.8 to 6 miles per gallon compared to 5 or 5.5 for conventionals. In an era before digital optimization, that small difference meant thousands of extra dollars per year for long-haul operators. So if everything looked this good, record profits, loyal drivers, booming demand, what went wrong? The truth is, the seeds of their downfall were already planted. Laws were changing, drivers were changing, and America's priorities on the open road were changing too. By the end of the decade, comfort, not compactness, would start to define the trucking industry. Cabovers, with their cramped cabs and roaring engines beneath the floor, couldn't compete forever with the smooth, quiet ride of the emerging long-nose conventionals. Still, nobody saw how fast it would happen. In just a few short years, the Cabover would go from symbol of innovation to a relic of the past. The fall, 1980 to 1985. The 1980s should have been another decade of dominance for Cabovers. Instead, it became their undoing. Almost overnight, the same traits that once made them brilliant, short, compact, efficient, became the very reasons they disappeared. And the collapse wasn't caused by one thing. It was a perfect storm. Laws changed, economics shifted, and drivers revolted. 1. The law changed, and the advantage vanished. For decades, the Cabover's biggest weapon was length efficiency, with its cab positioned directly directly above the engine, it could legally pull longer trailers than conventional trucks. But starting in the mid-1970s, states began to relax those length restrictions. California raised its maximum limit to 65 feet in 1974. Texas followed in 1977. And by 1982, federal highway law standardized the limit nationwide, making the length-saving advantage of cabovers completely irrelevant. Now, both conventional and cabover trucks could haul the same trailer size. So when buyers looked at their options, the long-nosed conventional, quieter, cooler, more comfortable, suddenly seemed like the smarter choice. 2. The economy collapsed. Then came the money problem. Interest rates skyrocketed during the early 1980s, peaking at over 20% while freight rates were still tightly regulated. To stay competitive, many trucking companies started borrowing heavily to buy more trucks, often cabovers, in hopes of making up the difference with volume. But when the recession of 1981 to 82 hit, that debt strategy backfired hard. Freight demand plummeted, loan payments piled up, and truck orders dropped by 60% in just 18 months. Manufacturers suddenly had factories running at 30% capacity, loaded with unsold cabovers. Banks started tightening credit. Some lenders even demanded higher down payments for cabover purchases, 25% versus 15% for conventional trucks. Wall Street noticed. Packer's stock, which had hit $45 per share in 1979, fell to around $20 by 1982. Navistar's dropped from $35 to $8. Analysts called it the cabover correction. A Morgan Stanley report from 1982 summed it up bluntly. The cabover engine truck, while technically superior in many ways, faces an existential crisis as its primary advantage, length efficiency, becomes less relevant. 3. The drivers gave up. Even before the economy turned, the drivers were losing patience. The same design that made the trucks efficient also made them exhausting. Sitting on top of the engine meant constant heat, noise, and vibration. A driver once joked, if the truck didn't shake you awake, the noise would. And that tilting cab, the one that made engine access easier for mechanics, meant every time the truck broke down, the driver's entire living space lifted into the air. Coffee, tools, personal items, everything went flying. As one driver put it, you learn to pack light and never trust gravity. Truckers began demanding the creature comforts of the new conventional rigs. Longer wheelbases, smoother rides, and bigger bunks. For companies trying to keep good drivers, comfort started mattering more than cargo space. By 1983, cabover sales had fallen off a cliff. Manufacturers shut down production lines, shifted resources to conventionals, or quietly dropped cabover models altogether. It was an almost cinematic downfall. In less than 5 years, cabovers went from America's most profitable truck to an endangered species. Not because they failed, but because America outgrew them. The aftermath. Late 1980s to 1990s. By the mid-1980s, America's highways had changed. The flat-faced icons that once defined trucking were disappearing, replaced by long-nosed conventionals that looked and sounded completely different. For many drivers, it felt like waking up in a new world. Truck stops that once echoed with the metallic clack of tilting cabs were now filled with sleek, stretched rigs boasting soft suspensions, quieter cabs, and plush sleeper berths. The cabover, the truck that once symbolized innovation and efficiency, had become a dinosaur in real time. Manufacturers didn't announce their deaths, they simply faded them out. Kenworth quietly discontinued the K100E in the early 90s. Peterbilt stopped producing the 362 around the same time. Freightliner, once the king of cabovers, pivoted almost entirely to long-nosed conventionals. By the time 1995 rolled around, only a handful of cabovers were still being built for special fleets or regional delivery. The big over-the-road models, the ones that had carried America's freight empire, were gone. But not everyone let go. Across the country, pockets of loyalists kept their old cabovers alive, not because it made sense, but because it meant something. For them, the cabover wasn't just a truck, it was an identity. They'd tell you about the visibility, how sitting up high and forward gave you the best view in trucking. They'd talk about the instant nostalgia every time a kid waved from the back seat. They'd talk about the satisfaction of piloting a machine that demanded more from you and gave you more in return. Some of those rigs still roll today, lovingly restored, polished to perfection, and paraded through shows like the Mid-America Trucking Expo or Iowa 80s Truckers Jamboree. They're not workhorses anymore. They're relics, chrome ghosts of a different era. And while America moved on, other countries didn't. Europe, Australia, and Japan never abandoned abandoned the Cabover. Overseas, space efficiency still mattered more than comfort. Narrow streets, strict weight limits, and compact cities meant the Cabover remained king. In Australia, trucks like the Kenworth K200 and Volvo FH are still staples of the outback. In Japan, the design never went away. It simply evolved into the backbone of urban logistics. It's ironic, the truck that was born in America survived everywhere except America. By the late 1990s, the Cabover's presence on US highways was reduced to a few nostalgic owner-operators, collectors, and fleets running older models until the frames rusted through. To most of the world, they were gone. To a few, they were legends. The modern comeback, 2000s to present day. For years, Cabovers were nothing but memories. Museum pieces, show trucks, or the dusty skeletons sitting behind forgotten freight yards. But history has a funny way of circling back. As cities grew denser and emissions laws tightened, the same problem that gave birth to Cabovers in the 1930s started to reappear: space. Delivery trucks now had to squeeze through crowded downtown streets where turning a long-nosed rig was nearly impossible. Fleet owners started realizing that the outdated Cabover design actually solved a very modern problem: efficiency in tight spaces. And this time, technology would fix the flaws. Electric truck startups like Tesla, Volvo, and Nikola quietly began adopting cab-forward proportions, not because of nostalgia, but because electric drivetrains don't need massive engine compartments. Look at the Tesla Semi or Volvo's VNR Electric, and you'll notice something familiar: a short nose, a high cabin, and that same upright stance Freightliner pioneered over 80 years ago. Even major manufacturers in Europe and Asia, Scania, MAN, Isuzu, and Hino, never left the Cabover format, refining it with every generation. Their modern cabs are aerodynamic, insulated, and safer than ever. The difference is that in those countries, the design never had to die to be appreciated. In the US though, Cabovers live mostly as nostalgia and novelty. Truckers still bring them to meets and shows, polishing their chrome, swapping stories about the good old days when truckers felt like cowboys and every haul was an adventure. There's a kind of reverence in those circles, a quiet respect for a machine that symbolized grit, discipline, and a time before automation, GPS, and corporate logistics. To younger generations, the Cabover represents something more than just a truck. It's a piece of Americana, proof that sometimes form follows law, but legacy follows emotion. And maybe it's not entirely gone.